then go ahead and stop it. Go up to the left corner and then put on pause.
So. Now we can stop.
Yeah. I'm gonna put this on show. You know, it's interesting, I've been reading a book on the Plantagenets and the kings, and Edward I was a great king, and Edward III was a great king. Edward II was not so good. And I'm giving a lecture to my predecessor, Bernard Farr, who was a great dean. And we've got Shama Kwanda, who's going to be a great dean. Tom Harvey in the middle, I'm not so sure, but it is really one of the things I need to say before I even start on this is so much of what I'm going to bring out today was really the brilliance and work of Bernard, who just did a remarkable job in terms of his role as dean in establishing the program, going through and getting this remarkable design and research that I'm going to talk about. The other people I need to acknowledge is the OCMS team. I mean, whether it's the leadership, the faculty, and the staff, what you see here is the embodiment and the production of a whole group of people, including our students are part of that as well. And so it's just an honor to be able to kind of bring this together as a talk. I want to begin with a quotation of Alistair McIntyre, and I always would use this whenever I was doing my introductory lecture to groups coming into OCMS. And McIntyre writes, he goes, a tradition of inquiry is more than a coherent movement of thought. It is such a movement that in the course of which those engaging in that movement become aware of it and of its direction, and in a self-aware fashion attempt to engage in its debates and to carry its inquiries forward. This article will consider Oxford Center for Mission Studies as a tradition of inquiry and a coherent movement of thought. McIntyre's word movement is appropriate in that traditions of inquiry are neither static nor fixed, and those who join in its inquiry and methods are as important as the ideas produced themselves. The activity they perform, they come to embody individually and collectively. To that degree, the purpose of this article is to bring to light the ways that OCMS has become a movement in the inquiry of holistic transformation, both in terms of the life of the mind and the renewal of earth in Christ's image. The conceptual framework for this paper, and Bernard was part of, we've had some conversations of this, is the idea of Bildung. And Bildung in Germany means culture, but it's much richer in the German than I think our own term of culture, because it refers to the complex system that shapes, corrects, extends corporately and individually our view of the world. And that's why I put up this word map. All of those aspects up there are part of Bildung, whether it's education, development, experience, moral sense, insight, character, a sense of maturity, virtues, excellencies. All these things are captured in the idea of Bildung. So Bildung refers to a complex system that shapes, corrects, and extends our view of the world. It is not static, but dynamic, and is formed as we construct experience and meeting through dispositions formed, skills gained, excellencies achieved, and virtues nurtured, and traditions extended and reformed through time. As such, Bildung encompasses the way people think, the way they act, the way they speak, the way they interact, research, and experience our world. Bildung is about formation, individual and collective. This formation is external and physical in terms of an academic program and the facilities that we live within. But formation is also an inner process of cultivation, manners, and demeanor. The two work together to form a culture, In other words, a certain sort of people in the world that distinguish themselves as people or a community. And so that's what this paper is about, is what is this building that is OCMS? Well, one of the things in terms of the impetus and origin of this radical building, which I see OCMS as, is a demographic shift that took place in China, in the world, that changed our whole framework of what we think about in terms of mission. As you can see in terms of the chart, look at that, the difference between 1910 and 2010. Europe made up 66.3% of Christians in the world, and North America's or North and South America, 30%, almost 90%. But if you go over to 2010, very completely different picture. Look at the growth of sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and that's continuing to change through time. And this was a very disruptive aspect in terms of Christianity. It was changing everything. All right. So one of the things that this is well captured in terms of what was the significance of this was by Andrew Walls, who wrote, "The theological map of the world has been transformed through demographic changes in the church brought about by the recession of Christian faith in the West and the huge accession to it in other parts of the world. All point to an urgent need for the development of Christian scholarship in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, for an increasing African, Asian, and Latin American leadership in theological education." This was the impetus that gave rise to OCMS. But it not only was just a change in the demographics, it was a change in terms of the ideational framework of what we mean by mission. Whereas much of the evangelical mission movement of the 19th and 20th century had defined mission as primarily evangelism and discipleship, that began to change with the rise of global Christianity. Christian scholars and leaders from the non-Western world were ready to challenge the intellectual blinders that they saw on Western academic hegemony and power over mission. And you see some of them here, whether it's Rene Padilla, Samuel Escobar, or Alberto Costas from Latin America, Melba Magay from Philippines, and David Lim from Philippines, Hua Yong of Malaysia, Vinay Samuel of India, Kwame Bediako, or David Guittari, or Peter Kuzmic of Croatia. These were people who began to challenge the framework of what's understood as mission. These Asian, Africa, Latin America, and other scholars argued compellingly that coming to Christ and mission demanded a radical engagement in the world they had inhabited and sought to transform. And meeting that urgent need had much to do with redefining how mission would be defined. This is well captured by Vinay Samuel, who wrote, "Mission is individuals coming to Christ, challenging corrupt and sinful systems, structures, and cultures, and enabling individuals and communities to experience God's transforming power. Transformation is to enable God's vision of society to be actualized in all relationships, social, economic, and spiritual, so that God's will may be reflected in human society and his love be experienced by all communities, especially the poor." This is also brought out by Rene Padilla. It's not only that the gospel is bigger than evangelism, mission is bigger than witness and evangelism or church planting. It also is a sense that there's a theological misunderstanding in the North that doesn't understand, or the theologies that were developed were really relevant to people around the world. So in 1976, Rene Padilla wrote the following: He said, it must be admitted that the total panorama of the church in the third world continues to be that of a church without theology. There is no hope that this situation will change as long as the mission's theological responsibility is conceived of as the exportation of theologies elaborated in the West, especially in the fields of theological education. As long as the gospel does not attain a profound contextualization in the local culture, in the eyes of the people in that culture, it will continue to be a foreign religion. And out of this came the development and the founding of OCMS. It began with the International Fellowship of Evangelical Missionary Theologians, which was that group you saw there, and some others who came to join here. And they came together. Their aim was to transform theology, mission, and embodied engagement, and to bring that from the perspective of the global South. That was the Bildung that they wanted to develop. This then led to the founding in 1983 of the Oxford Center for Mission Studies in order to nurture research that could effectively address questions of salvation, social justice and liberation, economic development, and non-Western biblical and theological studies. But that brings up an interesting question, all right? Why Oxford? Okay. Given the emphasis upon research from the non-Western perspectives, the founding of OCMS in Oxford appears paradoxical, given that the University of Oxford is the oldest university in the English-speaking world. It is the citadel of Western thinking and Western ideas. But one must realize that the selection of Oxford was pragmatic. From its founding, OCMS was never part of Oxford University. The founders had no interest in reproducing a Western academic institution. Instead, Oxford provided a location where international students could gather at a time when student visas were not difficult to obtain. Not so true today, but it's much easier to get people to come. Oxford allowed students to access the Bodleian Library and Oxford faculty who were willing to work with OCMS students. Further, they were able to find a facility in the purchase of this building, St. Philip and St. James Church on Woodstock Road, adjacent to several Oxford University colleges and close to the Oxford libraries. Finally, and probably most importantly, the United Kingdom at this time in its founding made sense given the great latitude that was being given to new ventures in higher education as validated partners with existing universities in the UK. This new venture in validation sought to encourage innovation and allow new funding sources for universities so they can reduce their reliance on the government purse. The onus, however, upon these validating universities was that the students of these newly minted institutions would receive the degree of the validating university. So if OCMS is validated by Leeds and the student does their PhD, they get a Leeds degree. They go to University of Wales, they get a University of Wales degree. Okay? Thus, an OCMS student studying at OCMS for a degree would receive a Leeds or a Wales degree upon completion. Thus, due diligence and careful monitoring were required to protect the reputation and brand of these universities. And this is where the rub was and continues to be. Yet for financial reasons, universities were keen to establish validations with new institutions. So much so that OCMS hosted an event in this building where they asked different validating universities to send people down, and they all set up tables, and you could walk around and go, well, what do you guys have to offer? And what do you have to offer? And what do you have to offer? And OCMS got to pick and choose. Not true anymore. As those of us who know, Dave and I are working through validation. But they were trying to get OCMS to sign up. Right? Those are some of the universities that OCMS has gone through. All right, oops, let me go back. All right, but early teething issues with validations. This is very important because one of the things you're going to discover, even through this whole talk, it was actually the challenges, it was actually the failures, actually the things that went wrong that allowed this place to adjust to become what it is. So the nature of validations and how they would function was not clearly defined at this point in time. Some validation partners treated OCMS as mere recruiters rather than a serious center for innovative research. Thus, they treated validations as a way of drawing students into their own departments and programs. Once ensconced in the university departments of theology and under departmental professors as supervisors, the culture and the brand of those universities began to hold sway. This pressed OCMS student research into the ideational and methodological crucibles of Western university departments and faculty. So the very thing that OCMS didn't want to do, the validation structure was actually reinforcing. This provided little breathing room for the non-standard, controversial, and often cross-disciplinary research topics of OCMS students. This put pressure on students to trim or restructure their research to fit into the very academic formation that OCMS had sought to avoid. This especially was true within secular theology departments at odds with OCMS' commitment to mission intégrale that inextricably entwines faith and reason, so that we don't separate the two, but what we believe about Jesus Christ should inform everything we do. It is rational in its own way. But one of our big problems with Open University, and you can go back and Hazel knows the letters, where Chris Sudgin was having all kinds of problems because they were saying, no, we can't accept your theses because we won't have anything that is so foolish as to be and naive as to believe that Jesus Christ is Lord. No, we want to study theology as a secular discipline. Right? And so, and that was part of the problem. The other problem was, even before a student could register with one of these universities, they needed a finished proposal and the ability and training to take on an advanced research degree. And the students who were coming in, given the diverse cultural, linguistic, academic, and experiential backgrounds of OCMS candidates, most arrived in Oxford without a clear idea of how to move from their mission passion and research interest to crafting a viable proposal, especially when the area they wish to research lay outside traditional Western research pigeonholes. So it was absolutely frustrating. Many languished in the pre-registration stage that could last up to 3 years, during which they often received a kaleidoscope of opinions from academics, practitioners, fellow research students, and faculty here at OCMS, but it was all over the map, right? At the same time, most OCMS students continued in their ministry and mission in their own countries and were able to visit Oxford and OCMS only sporadically at best. For most, to move to the UK, obtain visas for extended residency, and then raise significant funds for fees, housing, travel, and books left the pursuit of a PhD well beyond their means. Even those who were able to secure the resources needed to research and study in the UK, the challenges didn't end. The investment of toil and treasure made the choice to return to their homeland or to remain in the UK or abide in Europe or North America a hard choice. This was not necessarily selfish, and this is one thing that we need to appreciate. People who wanted to stay on and work, that was often their own families would encourage them to stay because they became a channel by which other members of the family could come and prosper and thrive, especially if their children were born and raised in the UK. Going back to home was going to a foreign country. In addition, pursuing a UK PhD can take up to 8 years or more. And living in the UK over an extended period changes a person's perspective on life, understanding, and ministry, and also on the topic. Spend too much time in Oxford and you start to get an Oxford mind, which is good and bad in some ways. All right. When that tenure is added to the conferral of a doctoral degree,
it can often create great tension between the student and the graduate, and the cultural hierarchies of home that can make a successful graduate less than welcome in their own context. You know, it's one of the worst things sometimes you can do is give someone a PhD and then they go home and go, I'm sorry, you guys are gonna have to take a back seat because I got a PhD now and I have all the answers. And that can create great division within churches in the countries where our students came from. Thus, rather than becoming agents of indigenous mission and culturation, they can easily become agents of Western views at odds with the very values and features, values and virtues that OCMS sought to nurture. So, validating OCMS research. Given the above, it is not surprising that OCMS as a doctoral program struggled in its early years. Many students in the program struggled to make progress, given that guidance was sporadic, and many students were required to navigate on their own towards a doctoral research degree. Hence, though passion for holistic transformation and mission remained fervent, the wastage rates were unacceptably high. And I'll talk a little bit further about that further on. To overcome the challenges OCMS was facing, the first step would be to change the validation relationship. OCMS was able to extricate itself from problematic university validation when it entered into a new validation with the University of Wales. And correct me on this, Hazel, but it's 95, 96, right? Okay. When the validation worked out with the University of Wales granted OCMS greater freedom to own, oversee, design, and develop the OCMS degree program with minimal interference. In other words, to inaugurate a truly bespoke OCMS academic culture of research, its own building. It was no longer trapped within the departmental ideational constrictions that had been facing in the past. No longer would OCMS research be under the auspices of a single academic department within the university and require university faculty to supervise. Instead, OCMS reported to the University of Wales Partnership Office as opposed to a department within the university. Instead, University of Wales appointed a moderator who was sympathetic to OCMS's vision for research and not directly involved in OCMS student supervisions. The University of Wales would monitor and approve the jointly governed program, but the overall design and management were now firmly in the hands of the OCMS team. This allowed for a broad horizon of research. New validation allowed OCMS to give wide berth to OCMS students engaged in an ever-widening range of research topics, well beyond the limits of traditional academic departments. This in turn allowed students to choose between a spectrum of methodologies as well that best suit the research that they wanted to approach. No longer constricted to name a supervisor within a department, OCMS was now free to identify and appoint supervisors who were neither employees of OCMS nor the validating university, so long as the supervision teams met university requirements. This allowed OCMS to recruit supervisors internationally who were able to support an ever-widening array of research topics and methodologies. This new approach to supervision afforded by the validation arrangement with UW was thus the catalyst of the OCMS buildup. And it allowed OCMS to engage in the very research diversity that the founders of OCMS wanted to see in terms of holistic transformation. This is what makes it possible. And you can see that in these kind of research science. One of the things I always like to put these up at graduation.
In fact, I can give a little bit of a story here. I'm fine on time right now. I went to University of Wales for one of our graduations with the University of Wales, and our students were getting a PhD. And of course, you know, when I was dean, I got to sit up on the days with everybody else, but it really bothered me. It was a bad ceremony. Because when you do a PhD and you get the degree, it's only appropriate that you read the research title. The degree is what we call a secondary good. A secondary good is the award or the the cup you get when you win Wimbledon. But the primary good is, what did you do? So when Federer or Djokovic play incredible tennis, that is the crown. All that $1 million or whatever they get in that cup is secondary to what you just saw on the court. And that's true of OCMS as well, OCMS research. When you see research titles like Oliver, I remember one time I was down in Kenya and I was, selling OCMS to potential students, and they said, "Well, who are some of your people?" And I said, "Oh, Oliver Kisaka Simiu." And he said, "Oh, he's important. He's on the Kenyan Council of Churches. He is a really important figure in terms of Kenya, and also a real peacemaker who is working in elections to try to bring healing to Kenya." And they were impressed. And so you can see in his title, Christians and Citizenship, the contribution of ecumenical Protestants to the citizenship of Africans in Kenya. That's OCMS thesis. That's OCMS mission. That is the kind of things we do. Or how this guy's in the news these days. God's rule in God's land, kingdom theology with special reference to the Palestinian church. Munter Isaac, all right? And Munter's on the cover of New York Times, all right, at Christmas Eve. And I just got in my email, I got to look at it, from a French reporter who got in contact with me, who wanted to know about Munter and his research. But this guy's a game changer. And the kind of things he's doing is bring honor to Christ. And his research makes a difference. God's rule in God's land, kingdom theology with special reference to the Palestinian church. Think about Munter. He was nominated at, there's a mission conference every year in Urbana, Illinois. It's this massive thing, and they fill up the basketball court and everything else. And they select every day one Bible expositor. They haven't selected me, they probably won't. But Munter got selected because he was recognized as one of the leading biblical scholars in the world. When the founder, or the people who paid money for the conference, found out that Munter was speaking, they disinvited him, right? But not because they could prove him wrong, or they would even debate with him, but because they were Christian Zionists who couldn't handle the fact that Munter would carefully deconstruct their arguments and show what the scripture teaches in terms of the land. This is OCMS research. Joshua Banda, down in Zambia, congregation-based HIV/AIDS programs in Lusaka, Zambia. How strategies of abstinence and marital fidelity address HIV/AIDS. I remember coming across this, I was just amazed, because they were taking on the UN and others to show, look, the greatest way to bring down rates of HIV/AIDS is actually to argue for strong family relationships and strong marital ties. That actually brought down the rate better than just handing out contraceptives, right? Powerful, powerful thesis, but the kind of thesis that OCMS would do. This is one, this is Samuel Chuma, who's been on our council of trustees, and won the Audrey Richards Prize winner, which is the top, John is right, the leading or the top thesis in the UK on Africa, is that right? Yeah. Reconciliation in South Africa and its significance for the mediating role of the church in Rwanda. And this was after the horrible slaughter in Rwanda went on between the Hutus towards the Tutsis. But this is the kind of work that was done. By one of my favorite students, and just a great guy, Philippe Ouedraogo. Now, one of the things about these pictures, these are taken by Philippe, he's a great photographer. He's just a natural photographer. Every time he would come in and I'd say, show me your pictures. I go, can I have them? All right. But these are the schools that Philippe was setting up, all right, in Burkina Faso. The contribution of Assemblies of God Church and Christian NGOs in overcoming obstacles to female education in Burkina Faso. Now you say, well, isn't that education not mission? No. It was significantly mission because once people within Burkina Faso saw that the daughters, one of the things that we know, and he brings out in his research, is when daughters learn and become educated, everybody's boats rises. They're the ones who go with their dad when they're coming, when they're selling their goods to the merchant, and dad goes in and gets his price, and the daughter looks at him and goes, he cheated you, Dad. He didn't give you the right rate for the cotton you gave him or the corn you gave him. See, the numbers don't add up. Okay, these are the kind of things. But Philippe Ouedraogo saw this, and this is winning people to Christ as they see what difference that Christ and kingdom make in their world, and just an incredible guy. So now the other thing, the new validation arrangement allowed OCMS the programmatic versatility to begin to address the wastage rates that were threatening the viability of OCMS and the research program. Adequate preparation for doctoral research haunted OCMS students given the uneven academic background of students in the global South. And this led to the importance of induction, which has always been a key cornerstone of OCMS. And why is he always insisted that students must come for the induction? There's always people saying, I don't need it, I don't want to come. No choice. You got to come in for induction. Adequate preparation research haunted OCMS students given the importance of induction began when it all started when they had a 3-day induction here. This was very, very early on. But basically what that was is actually Dublin Langham, Danny. They'd come on in, and John Stott would give some lectures on the Bible, and then they had a couple other people working with a supervisor. It was a 3-day thing and then over. So that's where it kind of began, but that was not sufficient. I mean, Uncle John was a great Bible teacher, but that isn't going to help you to do a PhD dissertation, right? Thus, OCMS replaced this with a bespoke 10-day induction, 2 weeks. Courses in developing research proposals, working with research supervisors, introduction to critical research skills, sound citation methodology, and field-based research were part of this, the instructions and the early inductions. In addition, all students were trained in the use of the libraries and inducted into the Bodleian and social science libraries by the librarian. Students were urged to stay in Oxford for an additional 8 weeks to develop their research bibliography and begin bringing together a formal literature review. So rather than just students being left on their own to try to figure things out, the wastage rates had OCMS adjust to help students get ready for research. The second thing was very important, and we all know about this, assignment of a mentor. And one of the things I always, the mantra of being a good mentor here is shut up and listen. All right. Your job as mentor is not to tell the student what they should be studying. Your job as a mentor is to listen to them and go, what is their passion? What is it that brought them to this place? What's happening in their country that we need to address? It's not our job to steer them into something we're interested in, it's to work with them. So a mentor is to assist a student to identify their research interest and to draw up a formal thesis proposal. Over time, the 2-week induction program was extended to its current 5-week induction program that includes courses in critical writing, skills, research methodologies, and the rest. And there's also that sense of moving from passion to proposal. So one of the great things in the OCMS stage, and one of the things that we've got a great faculty who do this, is to move from what people are excited about to an actual formal research proposal where that is out there. All right. Now, the next thing that was very, very important in terms of OCMS, in terms of addressing issues, was research enculturation and part-time residency.
Now, some might see part-time residency as a bad thing. Actually, I see it as a really good thing. You see, most of the research of our OCMS student was done in the countries they come from. They have to work with the people there. They do the data gathering and those kind of things. Or even if they're doing a text-based, they're writing there. So they get a sense of what's going on around them. All right. Now, one of the initial reasons for this kind of being part of the OCMS building was the problem of cost. Nearly all OCMS students are registered as part-time students. Research informed by local context and nurtures the contextual perspective and impact of their research. Further, this provides personal, vocational, and cultural continuity for the research and their ministry environment. Finally, part-time study discourages immigration to the UK or the US or the rest. You don't have a choice. It's not a pathway to a long-term visa status in the UK if you're a part-time student. Thus, encouraging OCMS scholars to continue in their ministry and mission work in their countries upon graduation. This has had a formative impact on OCMS, and students arrive at OCMS for their residency with fresh experience and insight from their own context and ministry and research. One of the most powerful times I find here is prayer time. You know, we can talk about what it means for the church to be under persecution in Pakistan. But when Maksud gets up and talks about a bomb went off and friends of his were killed by, terrorists who attacked their church, it comes a little closer and you realize that the kind of things that we're working on and addressing are very, very close. Okay. So you get this to and fro in terms of OCMS students. We benefit from students going and coming as we hear what's going on, and vice versa. They come and gather here and go back. So it's this back and forth that informs each other. So this to and fro of OCMS research and researchers as the influence upon each aspect of a student's living and ministry context inform each other. So this one I really like because this is Klaus de Roon. And Klaus lived, I can't remember the name of the tribe in Africa, but I was the chair of the examination. And the examiner is a cultural anthropologist who had known about this tribe for a really long time. And there were aspects of the tribe that researchers had tried for literally years to try to unlock, and they never would open up. And he stops right in the middle of the examination. He says, we've been trying to unlock this tribe for 20 years, and you've done it in your thesis. He says, because you were a missionary. And as a missionary, you're a friend. That was impressive. Mission was not a detriment to good research. It was the key that unlocked the door. And Klaus just did an incredible job with that. So anyway, with outcomes, all right. Thus, with the new validation in place, the building of holistic transformation gained ground. Candidates entering OCMS could now pursue research that suited their missional culture and context. In weekly student seminars, they were introduced to a widening array of research topic methodologies and diverse fields of study. A lot of times people come to me and they'll go, Dr. Harvey, I don't really want to go to that seminar. I'm just not interested in that stuff. But I say, you gotta go. Because that's how you find out what's going on in the world. That's how you find out how other people are doing research. And just it's very powerful in terms of being part of this community, this building that is addressing such a wide range of subjects. The growing array of supervisors with diverse expertise allowed OCMS students to allow their research horizons to broaden. And as former executive director Wansik Mall would periodically remind OCMS scholars now, because he did this all the time, he said that in joining OCMS, they were no longer parochial scholars, but global scholars. Now, by this, he did not mean that they were homogenized into a more universal or Western Enlightenment perspective. Indeed, just the opposite. It was through the relevance of their research for contextual ministry and mission that can now be shared internationally, given their shared interest in holistic transformation. You know, you just don't realize what an important place this is when you come in for your residencies. The connective tissue that reaches around the world is just amazing. And that's part of the building of OCMS. In terms of wastage rates, OCMS wastage rates dropped precipitously. In the year 2000, 38% of all students either dropped out or were timed out of the degree program. By 2005, that percentage had dropped to 0. 5 years. Currently, well over 80% of the students who register with the university complete their research and receive a PhD degree. Just in terms of completion rates, all right? From 1983 to 1993, 1 student successfully completed their doctoral thesis.
Wow.
From 1993 to 2003, 34 successful completions. From 2003 to 2013, there were 59 completions. In 2013 to 2023, there were 84 successful completions of the PhD degree. If current projections hold, it is likely that OCMS will have seen over the life of the PhD program nearly 200 completed doctoral theses from over 56 nations. That's incredible.
Something.
Now, so what? What does this have? How does this affect it? What about mission studies? What these point to is a significant shift in the study of mission. In the 19th and 20th century, in large measure, mission studies on the whole were viewed not just as a latecomer, but an outlier. Right? The core of Protestant theological training has been biblical studies, theological studies, ecclesiology, liturgy, music, homiletics, and counseling. That's generally what seminaries taught for most of the 20th century. Now, this makes sense given that Protestant seminaries are primarily in the business of training pastors to serve in churches. So that's why they're formed, and that's what they do. Now, in an academic world where research and writing are defined by research disciplines and departments, those departments then must have defined subject fields that are unique to their discipline. So if you're teaching in the Bible department, you teach Bible. If you're in the theology, you teach theology. If you're in counseling, you teach counseling, right? And these are all carefully defined so that they put you in the right place, okay? That in turn is reinforced through professional advancement within the institution, as junior faculty only attain tenure through research that contributes to a given discipline and field of study common to their departmental peers. If you want to get tenure and you want to move up in the university, you got to write to your department and you have to make, contributions in that area, but you stick to your area. If you're writing over there, they go, well, that's fine, but you're not getting tenure. All right. Fitting into this core and its relationship to the traditional seminary discipline has required ever greater definition to spell out the distinctive nature of mission studies and missiology in relationship to other disciplines in the seminary. So if you're at Fuller or you're at Asbury or at Gordon or whatever, you spend a whole lot of time going, no, that's mission studies, this is theology, all right? And then you work at definitions, okay? And that was interesting because I was the respondent to Kirsten Kim, who's one of the great missiologists of the world. She's brilliant. But she spent a significant amount of her time working on the Cambridge series on mission missiology. What has she been doing? Defining the term, what is and what is not mission studies, okay? As she noted, arriving at a concise definition of mission studies has not been easy given missiology's devilish plasticity over the past half century. And this can be seen, as she brought out in her paper, in the changing names of Fuller Studies of Mission. From the School of World Mission to the School of Intercultural Studies to its current iteration as the School of Mission and Theology. Right? And when you look at Kirsten's understanding, and the title of her paper was on kinesiology, all right? So the general view Kirsten came in terms of flows from the Great Commission of Matthew 28. And this can be evidenced in the title of her paper, The Future of Mission Studies, Kinesiology, question mark. And she writes, if mission studies or missiology starts with questions about what can be called the commission, not just the Matthean version, but also Mark and Luke and John's renderings, perhaps it would be better named commissionology to clarify this point. Now I perfectly understand what Kirsten's doing. This is what happens in academic departments when you're part of academic departments. Accordingly, the definition of mission and missiology radiates out of response to the call of Christ to disciple the nations. And at least in evangelical circles, this is centered on evangelism and church planting. Certainly, this was the missiological ground of the founding of Fuller School of World Mission. It's not hard to see how this reinforces the very institutionalization of the foreign theology that Padilla lamented. Let me say that again. It is not hard to see how this reinforces the very institutionalization of the foreign theology that Padilla lamented, as unsuitable for students in the global South and East. What the OCMS building produces is an implied missiology resting on the doctrine of creation. Listen to Vinay Samuel's words again. To enable God's vision of society to be actualized in all relationships, social, economic, and spiritual, so that God's will may be reflected in human society and his love be experienced by all communities, especially the poor. OCMS research is strongly oriented toward that's right. Excuse me. OCMS research is strongly oriented towards seeing redemption and the call in Christ and the call to Christ in terms of the kingdom of God and all that entails. Thus, rather than radiating from the Great Commission outward, the work of human salvation and vocation are informed by the covenant of creation that then unfolds through both testaments to encompass Christ's Great Commission as its capstone. It's not separated from, but Christ enables the great mission of God that goes from Genesis to Revelation. This broader vision of mission lies at the heart of the OCMS building and culture. As we have shown, OCMS is not pressed to refine and define mission studies and missiology. I've never written anything on defining mission. We've had some arguments about whether something really is inside or outside. I won't go into that right now. But because the academic building of OCMS exists outside the traditional academic departments, the faculty and students have been formed along different and academic disciplinary lines. This is the understanding of missiology and mission that provides common cause and informs and provides theological and biblical coherence to research that extends in a never-ending trajectory of mission reflection and engagement. I never know who's going to walk in the next door of the next cohort. Now, some complain, if mission is everything, then mission is nothing. Okay? To which OCMS reply is, along with Chris Wright, that if mission is everything, then everything is mission. Okay. At least in terms of the relationship of redemption to all relationships, social, economic, and spiritual. You can see those words of Vinay that wind their DNA through everything that we do as an institution. Okay. Certainly, this does not imply ignorance of current Western research trajectories, given the nature of literature reviews and research questions. But even here, much of the mining of the Western tradition is done through critical and deconstructive lenses if contributions are to be made. Thus, researching outside Western departmental boundaries has enhanced the ability of OCMS students and faculty to rethink, revise, and discover alternatives to Western theologies that have proved inadequate or might be better understood through the non-Western perspective and lenses. So, what does this produce in terms of the OCMS building? Building refers to the complex system that shapes and corrects and extends corporately and individually a view of the world. So what about OCMS? Our view of the world has been shaped by all this. First, that view is an inversion. It is a view from the global south in rather than the other way back. And I find that resonates really closely with Christ crucified. One of the things that I've always been, we think the way up is up and the way down is down. But one of the things I've always been impressed about Jesus is he tells us that the way up is down and the way down is up. All right. And that fits perfectly with how he built this place. All right. We come from the bottom up to bring new perspectives. Think about it. We have 200 theses that will be completed by there from over 56 nations. What a difference in perspective. What a build. I just don't know any other program or school that does that. All right. And you can have students from 56 nations, but do you get 56 perspectives? No. They will all conform to what the department or whatever, and that's where they'll work. All right. We'll get another person from Myanmar doing a PhD on BART. And I just go, yeah, that's the last thing that's needed. All right. Okay. All right. So the second thing it does is it corrects. All right. And what has OCMS corrected? The myopia of the global north. The hierarchical view of the world of the West to the rest. It turns things upside down. It corrects the nature of research and how research is done. We have made massive ways of doing research that's different, and I think is a great corrective in terms of failing of research internationally. It begins with the student and goes outward other than the other way around. And amazingly, people are discovering that's the best way to do research and do study. But for a long time, it was all, we call it mug to jug. The teacher's the mug, the students are the jug, and or the mug or jug to mug, and you just pour it out that way. Right? Well, the next thing I can't tell that story. Well, I will. I've got a little bit of time. I always remember this one time we were sitting around this table, and we had a woman named Deborah Ajula. And there was this professor, some big professor who was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he said, well, the first thing you need is you have to be able to breathe and have food and nourishment. And then you have to have some clothing and security. And finally, at the top of the pyramid is spiritual things. So that mission then should start with the basic things, feeding people, clothing people, those kinds of things. But don't tell them about Jesus until the end. And Deborah raises her hand. She's from Uganda. And she goes, excuse me, I think your pyramid's upside down. What? No, your pyramid's the wrong way around. And he goes, what do you mean? She said, have you ever been in a situation where you don't have enough to eat, and so you pray and food comes? You see, that comes first. Mm-hmm. Or have you ever been hiding in the bush and there's a guy with an AK-47 2 feet from you and you so much as cough, you're dead? That's when you pray. You see, your triangle is upside down. And the guy had no reply. She was exactly right. Looking from the bottom up changed the whole equation. So, in terms of how it affects corporately and individually, the design of the program has come to reflect the vision of its founders. That's what this building is. That's who we are now, in ways that could not have been imagined. And as I brought through, it's through a lot of mistakes and a lot of trouble. God bless Bernard and everybody else who stayed with it and got this thing right. through validations, inductions, supervisory seminars, lectures, publications, they embody a people and a culture and a way of studying that I think is absolutely unique. Individually, each person has their role in OCMS, whether it's in chapel, whether it's new programs, whether it's the GRP or research center, and this place is always living and expanding and going out. It's dynamic. I mean, I hope you understand that building is a thing that's alive. You know, it's always moving, always growing. It's a certain disposition and attitude and transformational attitude that just fits in everything. It turns turning the context and let it lead. I always like the reformanda semper reformata, reformed and always reforming. That's OCMS and everything we do. And finally, one thing I love about our virtues, I'm just about done here, but our virtues is what I think our faculty is the patron saints of lost causes. You know, and one of the things I always done, I've never done it because I thought it might be embarrassing, but I always wanted to name one faculty member each year who took someone who said that person will never get a PhD. There's no way in heaven. And yet they got their research done and they completed. And that's when we all shine. But finally, and this is where I will close. I always love this window. You can see this window over in where Nikki's office and Nadine's office. Now, this is the Archangel Aerial. And when you look at the Archangel Aerial, there is the great Oxford logo. Dominus illuminatio mei. The Lord is my light. But I believe there was a little bit of subaltern poking in the ribs of Oxford. Because on the bottom of it, it says, Salus mea, right? You see that? Numac et salus. The Lord is my light and my salvation. And that sums up, you know, who OCMS is and what we do. Faith and salvation have everything to do with the kind of research and engagement that's done through this book. So that's my talk. And with that, it is exactly time to quit. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm just bringing some of these people together to see at least. Thank you so much, Tom. It's very, very interesting. You start by setting the context, setting the context biblically, theologically, and from the mission point of view. And then you moved us through the Christian worldview and demographic understanding of Christianity from 1910 to 2010, and then moving to why OCMS and why Oxford, and into the OCMS students and the impact of the students around the world. And to now, it has been an interesting journey. Actually, you moved us through all this journey like a tour guide. And bringing all these people and introducing all these people. Recently, I was part of the admission interview, and we asked that students why. That is the question normally out of the admission interview. Why did you decide to apply to OCMS? And he said, when I look in my country, I notice those scholars who are more effective and have bigger impact in the mission are the OCMS graduates. And then I says to myself, wow, that is a wonderful, really, answer. And then it says, of the OCMS graduate, they have more confidence in what they are doing and more knowledgeable. I think what you just mentioned is just also approving that this new person who applied, actually, he's still going through the admission process to the OCMS and the new scholar. And thank you so much for reminding us why we are here and why we are doing this together, not only as scholars and as a faculty and the supporters on these things. I think with this, I will just open for questions and answers and response. And please, again, like always, use from the bottom of your computer, use the reaction button, raise your hands if you have a question. And when I call you, please unmute yourself, ask your question. And the same thing with the room, please raise your hand and ask your question. Just be brief. And I know you have lots of memories to say and lots of really contribution to make, but could you please be brief? Any of you, and can you just stop sharing? We can see people here. And the first question, please do. Tom,
very good. I understand a little bit more.
can you just stop you from here? Because sometimes we may not know the new people. Is that possible? Just quickly mention your name and then question.
My name's Danny, and I work for Langham, who send lots of people here.
Yep.
And I loved this presentation. I've got lots of notes even. One of your points, I think, was that students are the point of OCMS.
Yeah.
And by accident, a freak of accident, a complete freak, you chose male students.
Oh, well,
So my thought, that's interesting. You've chosen 5 men, and that was a little bit of a mission. So I wonder if you wanted to
yeah, let me correct it.
correct that, and and maybe explain it. Maybe all the OCMS women, they don't do everything.
Well, actually, there were so many that I could have chosen from, and that was a fault, because one person that I almost took was who did microfinance in Zambia. Yeah, Irene Mutalema, or Judy Barinol, or just again and again. The reason I chose these was because that title, but you're right, I should have included more of the women's thesis.
Irene's on the screen.
Oh, Irene. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, but Irene's thesis
Hello.
just it's so good. And that's a fault of mine. Thank you for pointing that out. The women at OCMS, I have pictures of OCMS.
I think another thing is the fact, sadly, majority of the early scholars were men.
They were early, but of late, it's been moving more and more towards 50-50 or even more women than men.
Nowadays,
And that is a trend that we really love and embrace at OCMS, and we're so excited. We're seeing the kind of breakthrough research that women are participating and bringing to OCMS, which is absolutely essential to who we are and the building of OCMS. So
One of our female graduates, her name is Lula. She's a Palestinian Christian living and working and serving in Nazareth. And she did a PhD on reconciliation among churches in Israel. And she went back and started a new foundation, a Center of Peace Studies. Obviously, it's a very troubled time, but she's working very hard now trying to seek peace and reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians. So she
I did mention one woman's, but I didn't have her slide up. And that is joins, which is the forgiveness and the reintegration of child soldiers in
Stephanie Goins.
Stephanie Goins, yeah. I had that one up.
Oh, she's a very brave
Yeah.
lady. One lady went into Sierra Leone.
Yeah. And significantly, I always use that one when I talk to people about the bringing together of faith and good research. Because what she points out is that things that are religious rights, spiritual rights, are actually the key that unlock healing in the issues in terms of Sierra Leone. But anyway, you're still a good point, Dan.
Yeah, it is a good point. Thank you. Stuart, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question or comment?
Tom, I'm not sure I agree with you on some of the points, and I don't know whether this is going to be published, but one thing I thought, and perhaps I got the wrong end of the stick here, was you made a point of there being only one PhD in the first 10 years of OCMS. I'm not sure that's entirely fair, because OCMS was a really tiny organization and it hadn't worked out quite how it was going to proceed and whether the PhD program was the place to focus. So particularly if it was published, I'd like you to think very carefully about whether that's gracious to our founders.
That's fair, yeah.
And the other thing, I can't recognize the academia I spent all my career in your heavy stress on the malign influence of disciplines. That's absolutely not my experience of academia in here, the US, Japan, Germany, France. I think this is partly a myth that it's been convenient for OCMS or some OCMSs to stress because it makes OCMS more triumphant, so to speak. But interdisciplinarity, in my experience, has been very much part of what you might call standard academia for many years.
I would,
It's not been my experience in the US.
yeah, I would disagree fully, Stuart. I think you're right. The interdisciplinary work that happens. In fact, my own PhD did enforce interdisciplinary studies. All right, so that was part of the studies. But I would say this is when you're making a contribution to the field, it's largely within the departmental basis. So, and I think that's what Padilla was addressing. Was you weren't getting the kind of international diversity or perspective in terms of those, but it was set largely by the questions that were set in the Northern Hemisphere and the Sun.
May I make a contribution here? So I'm just using my thesis as an example. So I don't think my thesis was done in a conventional way, which would not appear possibly in Oxford or in Cambridge or Edinburgh, because I did half my thesis on biblical study and half my thesis on systematic theology, combining two together. And you won't normally be able to do this in other universities. If you do biblical study, you do biblical study. If you do systematic theology, you do systematic theology. You don't mix the two together. Very strange for a Chinese Christian from the East. It's very strange why this has to be completely set apart. So I disagree. So I went on head on and tackled the two areas and brought them together.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's one example.
Thank you, David.
It's not cross-disciplinary, but it's breaking the boundary.
Yeah, as far as I remember, I think the first PhD OCMS was completed way back in 1989.
Yeah.
It was 6 years, full 6 years after OCMS was started as an institute. So, and this would have been through the CNAA.
Right, that's the first one, CNNA.
Wales came much after.
Yeah.
I think Wales,
I think it was Westminster.
yeah,
In fact,
that's
that's
right. That was
Peggy
through
Yo
University of Oxford.
turns through Westminster.
Yeah, and Wales came on board, I think you said 1996. And I joined OCMS way back in 1997. And that probably shows you how old I am. It took me 4.5 years to finish my program as a part-time researcher. But what I want to really say is that when I joined OCMS, I was quite at sea. I landed here not knowing who to talk to. No one was assigned as a house student to me. I was expected to speak to both Vinay, Chris, who were house tutors for everyone in OCMS, and this wasn't really an ideal place for research. And I'm not bad mouthing, really. We were in that stage of our development, and things changed very quickly when my friend Bernard Farr joined as the academic dean of OCMS. In fact, the kind of structure you see in OCMS even today goes all the way back to Bernard's time, which was lettered in many ways through the efforts of Tom, who's sitting right here. And I've seen part of that develop over a period of time. And I think both Bernard and Tom deserve to be thanked for the way OCMS has evolved over the years. But the question I have, Tom, is to do with really the future of the validated programs
Oh, yeah.
of the kind OCMS has. And we've kind of got used to the partnership model that gives us freedom to develop and deliver the degree program that we have today. I have a view on it, but I really want to hear from you, in your own words, exactly what you think the future of OCMS is, or any validated program of the kind we are using is.
Well, one of the things you and I have been working on, David, but as I've been going around and have been involved in validations and looking at validations, I don't think the future is bright. I think across the UK, what was the big thing in terms of doing validated programs was kind of the big thing in its day, but it's fading fast. So Middlesex University, who we've been validated with, was the literally aircraft carrier with over 27 programs that they validated, and that has shrunk. We went to Chester and looking for a possible validation, and they said, no, Manchester I've worked with, they're not doing them anymore. So it's basically ending, all right? But one of the things I'd say, and that, with every change, one of the things in terms of this thing, and back to Stuart's point, which I think was a good point, is I wasn't throwing rocks at the founders. They started a program in this building with the resources they had, and that it developed, and it was the twists and turns, but wastage rates were high, all right? I mean, even in 2000, things were better by 2000, and we're still looking at, 38% of people just dropping out of the program or not, or being timed out. That's not good, all right? And it was worse before. But through the work of Bernard and the faculty and other people, and working with University of Wales, we righted that ship. In the same way, I think validations are beginning to come to an end. And my own view is, if we're going to continue to keep this going and have a PhD program that does the kind of things we do, we need to get degree granting authority. The one thing I would say is that when I first came into being dean, I used to go talk to people, and they go, well, who do you work with? I say, I'm OCMS. And who are you? And what do you do again? And where are you? You're in Oxford. I haven't seen you. There's people in Oxford, they've never heard of us. That's not true anymore. That's not true anymore. We're known. When I go into different programs and top programs, they know who we are. I remember a few years back, one of the there's a guy named Mark Knoll, who's he's an evangelical scholar, theologian. He was every year Oxford nominates an American scholar to come up and be the American nominated scholar. And he was coming to Oxford. And he was also my old Sunday school teacher, but I know he didn't remember me. So I wrote him a letter. I said, I read in the Oxford Times, whatever, university newspaper, that you're coming. Could I get you to come to OCMS? And he wrote me, and he says, I know who you guys are. You guys are fascinating. I'd love to come up and have lunch with the students and talk with them. Yeah, that our sense of gravitas in the world has grown.
Can I just make a point? Funnily enough, and I was looking at something in the archive, this was an idea that was thrown up in 2004 when there was a big look at how where OCMS was going, and the whole idea that OCMS itself would become a validating institution was considered by the academic board. That was at a time when London Bible College, whatever it called itself, was actually applying to Middlesex.
Yeah.
I think that gave us the idea, but it was interesting that 20 years ago, this was an idea that was floating around in OCMS.
But I think there was a time when I went back. I remember when we moved from Wales to Middlesex, people were always concerned about, well, if I've got a Wales degree, is that better than a Middlesex degree? But now I think
most people would value very highly having an OCMS degree, but that stands for something. That's good. So my own sense, David, is that, and I've told people this, you know, I think our current validation talks are gonna go through, we're gonna be in good shape, but things are proceeding well, but what I've told Shama and I've told others is, don't count on an next one. I think the whole validated schema of validating small innovative programs is passing away in the UK.
How about the route in Europe?
Yeah, the problem is doing that in Europe, and then with European PhDs, which I've talked to, and I've got good friends in Europe, and when we were looking about, you know, you do a PhD in Holland, it's completely different. You know, and I'm working with Middle East, North Africa, that's developing a PhD there, and it's all written. There is no viva voce.
Oh.
All right, you basically write it in, they either pass your written thesis or not. And then you have this thing where the faculty gather, but that's all kind of an event where you have a dinner. It's a performance. It's already passed. All right. And the kind of changes, and you run into all the problems I was.
Yeah. No, I think another things we need to actually consider is the increase of the online education. It is changing everything. And we can't say, as you say, 2004, you were thinking, and still we are in here. And the university is offering validating, and I think they will change their views.
Right.
Because at the moment they are not ready for this new AI development, not only the AI, the digital learning and all these things. I think that in 5 years, even maybe less than 5 years, the whole education system will really look different. We don't know how, but especially postgraduate education system will look different.
One of the things in that, I agree with you, Sarah, and we're developing a virtual campus, but one of the things I've tried to argue in this paper is the whole idea of building and being a certain kind of place in the world. And I think we found a good middle ground so that students come in and do residencies, but they spend most of their time away from OCMS. But we talked about that, of whether we would require residencies, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
One of the things that we see is people complete better. There's a lot of online education, but the rates of completion are very low. All right, they're not very good. Secondly, because of AI, you don't even know if you're talking to a real person on the screen or not. All right, and one of the things about being in the same building, there's a sense of presence. And I think that's true of God as well. I think there's a sense of when we're together, gathered in a place, and not just online, but physically gathered, that is part of the building that makes this place what it is. And so I think we will continue to develop the virtual campus and continue to develop our digital resources. But in my view, I think it would be a big mistake to go to totally online.
Yeah. And anyone else wants to make a comment, ask a question, or share a memory?
I like the word traditions. I think you built up a tradition of general people and thesis which have been completed. We know, we can see, okay, this is an OCMS issue.
Well, you know, one of the reasons I chose the McIntyre quote is that tradition of inquiries are ones that people in a self-aware fashion carry forward. You are part of that. And that one of the things I wanted to do in this paper is to help bring to concentration that you're part of something. You're part of that building. It's embodied in going forward, and that you come to understand that, share that, and carry it forward. It's gonna go in different directions, all depending on who God brings together in this place to go forward. But now you're part of it. All right. And it's a great tradition to be a part of, because I really do think we have come to embody exactly what Vinay says in that statement, and Renee Padilla was saying in that statement, that we are not in the process of building foreign theologies that we then drop around the world.
See that Bernard is there. I'm just wondering. Yes.
Any thoughts, Bernard?
Last word. Unmute yourself, please.
You're muted, Bernard.
You're muted. Still
Uh,
muted.
You're muted,
You are
Bernard.
muted.
Unmute yourself.
I think sound like you can control.
Yes, it just.
You can unmute. Yeah.
Three dots.
Hit the three dots.
Yeah,
on
there
the
we
side.
go. There we go.
No, I did that.
It's unmuted. Okay.
There you go.
Go on, speak.
Yes, well, wonderful to be with you. And what a journey. It's a trip down memory lane for me, Tom. So thank you, thank you very, very much for that. And if I could just pick up a couple of things. I was very keen regularly to emphasize that you take the group of you just sitting in that room, when one's in the building at OCMS, it becomes very easy to think that OCMS
Right.
is who is in the building. And of course, in these days when we have the internet and Zoom and everything, it's quite clear that OCMS is everywhere.
Mm.
And there's the central point. There's no more a centre than the centre of London or something like that. I think that's how I understand the word centre. So there is say Piccadilly Circus or Charing Cross or somewhere which is the centre of London. But London is everywhere where London is, and it increasingly expands and changes over time. And so as you're sitting there and I'm sitting here with you, there's all those alumni and all those faculty and other institutions who've been involved with OCMS, and they're all part of the OCMS story. And so it's wonderfully, I think, liberating as an experience. You say, instead of when I was at my previous college, I was head of the School of Theology, and that is what defined me. But being the Dean of OCMS for those years, that didn't define me at all, because OCMS was way beyond anything that was in the building, which was kind of the bit of it that I was managing. And it was wonderful to go back to those founding minds. What great people they were that God raised for the church. And it's as I was listening, I was thinking, Tom, that there's been no mission drift. That the trouble with institutions as they age is that they drift away from their founding mission. Mm-hmm. And you can see some terrible examples of that in Oxford, for example, at a college that was founded by two evangelical bishops to have an evangelical foundation. And nobody wants to know about that anymore. So it's wonderful that you've re-emphasized, and hopefully it will go on being re-emphasized, that OCMS, the understanding that OCMS has a mission is that it is absolutely founded in the doctrine of creation. It's not limited to what is usually the case at mission. In fact, Leeds University would regularly refer to us as the Oxford Missionary Centre. And well, yes, in many ways it is, but not in the sense that they were thinking of it. So it is something to hold on to, that from the very beginning of God's creation, there was built into our nature as human beings the need to place everything that we have in the service of God, whether it's law, education, economy, medicine, politics, it doesn't matter. Our personal lives, our lives together, it doesn't matter. So it's founded in the doctrine of creation, but expressed in the notion of kingdom. And the kingdom understood there as being where God rules. Where does God rules? He rules in the whole of creation. And those are absolutely key. They're wonderful to be reminded of that. Thank you very much, Tom, for that. Lovely to see you all. And as to the future, well, one just has to trust God to take one into the future that is. Because again, if God has a continuing purpose for OCMS, then OCMS will continue. If God does not have a continuing purpose for OCMS, then it came to pass. So yes, one just has to rest in the wisdom of God and the grace of God in all the challenges that arise. And certainly, one of the things I loved about your presentation was the sheer variety of contexts within which OCMS has had to rework its understanding of what is possible. And as the situation is changing rapidly again, old possibilities close down, but new possibilities, we trust, will arise. So thank you. Loved being with you. And faces old and faces new. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you so much, Bernard. And yes, Mark.
Just a quick question to Tom. Tom, you mentioned, actually Bernard's just to refer to it, you mentioned the struggle with the secular academy, which is a very important area of discussion. And I just wonder whether, rather than sort of just stepping aside from that, whether there is a way in which faith-based institutions can continue that conversation with the academic institution that is drifted towards the secular approach to not only the study of mission, but in many other aspects as well. I use as a parallel there the fact that my first degree was in theoretical physics.
Yeah.
And I can remember, I suppose I was influenced by the academics those days, being quite scathing about practical physicists and just describe them all as engineers. They just do engineering, we do physics. But there has been, since, I mean, that was 50 years ago I did that. Over those 55 decades, there has been a very significant re-engagement of theoretical physicists with practical physicists. And those that are in the business of doing physics rather than just thinking about physics. And I just wonder whether we can learn something from that re-engagement that's been there in the science field from the way that we relate, because otherwise we run the risk of completely stepping outside the academy and leaving the academy to do its secular thinking and not having any influence there.
Well, I think that's of critical importance. And one of the things that people ask me all the time, they, especially very, conservative evangelicals, well, all your supervisors are Christians, aren't they? I go, no, they're not. Like a whole, I'd say a good percentage are not. And I have found that conversation one of the most fascinating things that happens in this place is that we stay engaged with all kinds of aspects of people who don't believe. And that I think we have to handle that winsomely and creatively in interesting ways. So one of the things, and Dave and I were talking about this, we have Terry Gard, who wrote this paper called Mining God's Way. So anyway, Terry comes in and he's a miner and he sees all the destructive impact of mining globally. But he finds he's worked with artisanal miners up in Kenya who are also people of faith. And he wants to bring together practical theology and solid mining engineering. And so he came in, he said, I've gone to mining schools and they say, well, we got a mining school, but we don't have a theology school. And I've got a theology department and we don't do mining. So there's no way we can support your thesis. And so he comes back to me. I said, well, let's put this together. So anyway, we got one of the top mining professors to be his main supervisor. And Terry was convinced, because this guy's not a Christian, he's very much a material miner, right?
that he's not interested in what Terry's doing, he's not interested in the God side at all. And Terry's getting very, very frustrated because he just felt like he wasn't getting any headway. So anyway, we had to transfer him. So we bring this guy in and everybody's got a comment on Terry's work and we question him and everything. And finally, you know, we're doing the whole review. The guy who's the mining professor, he goes, the only reason I got involved with this is because you were talking about mining God's way, and that seems so crazy to me. I want to know about where is that part, you know? And you can just see Terry's eyes. This guy really does care about this, you know? And yes, I think actually because once you get into a creational mode, as Bernard was saying, then all fields and all things become interesting and part of that conversation. The one rule we do have, we've had to enforce, and Bernard will remember this as well. There are times when you'll get professors who will go, I will willing to be a supervisor, but you have to come at it from a totally secular perspective, and you can't talk about it in terms of mission and your beliefs in God. And at that point, we go, no, you can't supervise our student. You can't put blinders on our students. We're going to be engaging from this perspective, but we feel like you're the best person to get involved in this. So again, this is a really interesting building in terms of that very conversation. You know, I don't think quantum mechanics, right, is any different for Christians than it is for non-Christians, you know. You know, looking at you know how that all works together, the facts lead where they lead, you know, and so having that secular input into this place, but we reject both poles, which is there's no such thing as knowledge unless faith and that is removed, or the other side that says only if it's faith-based is it true, and we reject both of those. So, yeah, we hold them in tension.
Exactly,
And
thank
that
you.
quantum mechanics is very theological.
And that is a very interesting question, I mean, discussion, which we need to continue. But again, it's not only the universities start doing that, especially when I was in Edinburgh University, professors start engaging in that kind of things. It's not really, they are not, I mean, they're trying to bring them together again. Yeah, and thank you so much. With that, can we just join me, please, and say thank you to Tom. Thank you, and we're looking forward to read it. And thank you so much for the people on the Zoom and people here. And God bless you all. And thank you.